And I've got none other than Stephen Nerayoff, who helped establish the ICO, the utility token. I'd say well in the weeds with it, the launch of Ethereum. Stephen, what are you doing here in Las Vegas, sir?
That's a good question. So I actually wasn't planning on being here.
You were hoping to meet the management of Linqto here today?
That's my hope, right? So I came here to see what I can do. I have a background in a lot of the things that they're talking about. And so if I can mediate something, and ultimately the goal is to get these 11,000 people, and if I can do anything to get them back their accounts opened or get them their stock or whatever it is, because I understand there's a lot of anxiety out there and I'm in a position to help, so I want to help.
What do you mean that you have potential answers within your file?
I put what's called a Privacy Act request, and it's like a FOIA request that people make, except by law they have to give you anything that's identifiable by your name. And the SEC has not provided it to me, even though they're supposed to by law. But what they did do is they said that they have 15 gigabytes of data that has my name associated with it. Why that's curious is because when I asked for that information during my prosecution, the Department of Justice said that the SEC was not involved in my prosecution. So if they weren't involved in my prosecution, why do you have 15 gigabytes of data on me? And again, I'm not going to jump to conclusions, but it would make sense that the other things that were going on around me that perhaps they wanted me to be quiet about or whatever, probably are in there. And as we saw from the Hinman emails, they weren't exactly being so discreet about stuff, considering where they were outside of the law.
So do you think we might even be seeing some type of similar behaviors or similarities running parallel with Linqto?
I can't make that assessment yet.
It's funny, you have no vested interest, but me on the other side, I'm a former employee. I have exercise stock options. I came through the Ripple community and used my XRP to invest in Ripple Labs private equity. And so that is in itself also identified that there's a separation between the asset classes itself, or Ripple as a company and XRP as the digital asset.
I have 11,000 Ripple shareholders in the XRP Army. Frankly, that's really all I care about. Anybody that watched what happened with ETHgate and the XRP Army, probably not the community you want to mess with. We're going to look at the facts and see where the facts lead us. And if there's a culprit, then they'll be held accountable. But oftentimes, there is no culprit.
What's going on, family and friends? We're here at the MGM Grand for the XRP Las Vegas conference, the largest XRP conference in the world. And I've got none other than Stephen Nerayoff, who helped establish the ICO, the utility token. I'd say well in the weeds with it, the launch of Ethereum. What's going on, Stephen? What are you doing here in Las Vegas, sir?
That's a good question. So I actually wasn't planning on being here, but I was approached by some people from the XRP Army and was alerted to this situation with Linqto and 11,000 customers that have Ripple Labs stock, and apparently they can't get to it.
According to the press release that was launched today, May 31st, that the 11,000 investors make up nearly 3% of the Ripple equity.
So I had a few concerns. I'm not rushing to judgment. I came here as a neutral third party. Obviously, the XRP Army is like close to my heart, and so they're family. But I want to come to the bottom of this, but the 3% is not unimportant also for Ripple Labs, right? Brad's got enough to deal with and taking over a lot of systems and modernizing them, and if I can help come to some mediation. So what I'm really here for was to do a fact-finding session, hopefully meet with the management. They've said that what this is about is their main concern is causing this is actually to protect the customer.
So you were hoping to meet the management of Linqto here today?
That's my hope, right? So I came here to see what I can do. I have a background in a lot of the things that they're talking about. And so if I can mediate something, and ultimately the goal is to get these 11,000 people, and if I can do anything to get them back their accounts opened or get them their stock or whatever it is, because I understand there's a lot of anxiety out there and I'm in a position to help, so I want to help.
When you have the likes of Sullivan Cromwell involved, they were brought into the fold by the new leadership at Linqto, what does that signal to you?
I should be the first person to jump to conclusions, but I'm not going to. I saw that jumping to conclusions can always be wrong. Sullivan Cromwell is a very big firm, and clearly in a lot of our opinions, there were a couple bad apples that came out of there. Does that mean that the whole tree is bad? I don't know. But well, maybe I'll get to speak to them too and see what their take is on it. But there is obviously an irony or maybe more. I don't know. We'll see to their involvement.
Yeah, because for those in the audience, Sullivan Cromwell was the law firm which Jay Clayton worked at.
Yeah, that was not, and was very much, I'm not going to name him personally, but I will say, I'll go on the record that the SEC was very much behind falsely prosecuting me, which I got dismissed with prejudice. And if anybody saw, I filed a $10 billion lawsuit against the government for malicious prosecution. And important for that really is I want to get the discovery. And that discovery, because people haven't gotten any answers, I want answers why I was prosecuted. I was in the same boat as the XRP Army, and the answers may be within my files.
What do you mean that you have potential answers within your file?
I put what's called a Privacy Act request, and it's like a FOIA request that people make, except by law, they have to give you anything that's identifiable by your name. And the SEC has not provided it to me, even though they're supposed to by law. But what they did do is they said that they have 15 gigabytes of data that has my name associated with it. Why that's curious is because when I asked for that information during my prosecution, the Department of Justice said that the SEC was not involved in my prosecution. So if they weren't involved in my prosecution, why do you have 15 gigabytes of data on me? And again, I'm not going to jump to conclusions, but it would make sense that the other things that were going on around me that perhaps they wanted me to be quiet about or whatever, probably are in there. And as we saw from the Hinman emails, they weren't exactly being so discreet about stuff, considering where they were outside of the law.
So do you think we might even be seeing some type of similar behaviors or similarities running parallel with Linqto?
I can't make that assessment yet. It took me, I had the suspicions for the whole ETHgate thing way before I actually said it publicly, because I wanted to really have enough evidence. So I'm not going to speak until I actually have evidence. So right now, all I've heard is he's a Stanford law professor, right? Got to give the guy the benefit of the doubt.
Are you talking about the new CEO, Dan Siciliano?
I don't know him, but he has an illustrious background. So I'm not going to assume that he's doing something malicious. And maybe there's some things that can be handled, but it seems to me that the two sides are having a hard time communicating with each other. And so since I don't have a vested interest at all, I'm not involved in Linqto, I don't own any Ripple stock through them, I have no financial interest in this, perhaps I can come in and try to mediate between the two.
Yeah, it's funny, you have no vested interest, but me on the other side, I'm a former employee, I have exercised stock options, I've got $250,000 on the platform, including Linqto equity as well, which we didn't hear anything about Linqto equity while Dan Siciliano was up on stage today. All we heard was about the remaining portfolio companies. And for me, that's where I think the big crux is. What are your thoughts? Because in full transparency, being a shareholder of Linqto, the stock went from $4 to 49 cents from around this time last year. Under the new leadership, how can you blame former management for decisions that are being made right now?
On the face of it, it doesn't look like that would be the natural conclusion. So I'm not going to say that's not what you should assume. So, unless there's something that they had committed to, for example, that bound the company or something that they couldn't get. But I think really my first thing is I have 11,000 Ripple shareholders in the XRP Army. Frankly, that's really all I care about, right? And it's not that I don't want Linqto to survive, right? If I can help, that's fine. That's my sole focus. I've got one goal: get them their equity, and because I know that this means a lot to them, right? And also, it's actually important for Ripple Labs, right? If these things are held in like these vehicles, and so Linqto has 11,000 shareholders that indirectly but directly own stock in Ripple Labs, but in Ripple's, in their ledger, it's only one stockholder. And so 11,000 stockholders basically turns it into a public company without them going public. So I don't think they need that headache. And so this is obviously probably more than an annoyance for them. I'm sure they're watching it pretty carefully. Since 2014, I've been in interviews calling them the gold standard in crypto. They still think they're the best management company. Brad, Stu, Chris.
Now, what would you recommend for the 11,000 investors that are so uncertain with this given circumstance surrounding Linqto?
Look, I'd love to tell them, don't worry, you're going to get it, right? But it's not like somebody can come in and just take your value. As my understanding that there's no debt in the company.
Yeah.
And so it should be shielded. So as far as my understanding of how these are set up. So unless there was something wrong with the way they were set up, or there's some other legal issue, I heard that there was an SEC issue, but which kind of was a little bizarre because they don't oversee them. They're not under the SEC's regulation.
I heard it was almost a self-inflicted wound.
I'm curious why there's a wound at all. But again, I'm not going to jump to any conclusions. My point here is that all I see is there's two countries at war, right? And I care about one, but the only way to fix this is to hear both sides and figure out how do you get them to compromise.
Is it two countries or two systems?
It's funny because you say that, but Linqto actually was creating a democratizing capital, and I was architect with T0 when I created the security token, and so our model is not that different than the Linqto model. I understand their model, and the idea was to be able to average investor to not have to be an accredited investor to get into these large investments. If you don't have $5 million and you're not at Goldman Sachs or whatever, then you can't participate in a company like Ripple Labs. But through them, you can. Ironically, that would be your point was, it would be the shame because that was a new age way of doing it. And so to that extent, the Linqto model living on, I think would be very important.
Be very important, but it's almost like we're seeing, I don't want to call it a hostile takeover because that's jumping to conclusions, but it sure does look like, and it's almost a legacy type of system that is threatened by a new age boy on the block. And here we are, us 11,000 investors are getting the short end of the stick because of that.
Yeah, don't assume you're going to get the short end of the stick. A lot of people thought I was going to get the short end of the stick. I said on the first day that I got arrested, I said something that actually didn't really make any sense statistically, but I said I'm going to get this indictment dropped because I don't know how many years another indictment had not been dropped, let alone with prejudice. But the United States government didn't intimidate me. And I don't think management of this company should intimidate anybody. They bought their stock, and there'll be one way or another that they should get that stock back and enjoy the appreciation. It's because I think most of it is not just the money they have here. They're looking at what Ripple will be in 5-10 years.
Yeah. So if there was any potential of a restructuring of the org for Linqto, because after we're talking about 1/10 of the value from this time last year for Linqto, and the platform's been shut off since February. They're not making any revenue. What do you think are the potentials of where Linqto ends up in the short order?
It's interesting because I understand that there's some bankruptcy attorneys involved, but I don't know the specifics of it. I understand that there's no creditors, so there's these shareholders of various companies, but mostly it's Ripple. But here's the good thing about the bankruptcy system: is there's a trustee gets appointed, and there's going to be a judge involved, and so it's not like somebody can come in and just take the value. There are insidious ways of doing things, but that's why we have the judicial system. And I would hope that anybody in this planet, especially anybody that watched what happened with ETHgate and the XRP Army, probably not the community you want to mess with. Yeah. And so it's one of the reasons that I felt like at home right there. And I put myself out there because I saw how much they cared, and it wasn't a toxic community. Yeah. And I've been around crypto since 2010. And that was the first community that I actually saw that was not toxic. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great to hear. Thank you for recognizing our very open-minded and utility-based thinking of where we hope that this world is going, or at least this financial system underpinned by institutional-grade blockchain infrastructure, leveling the playing field for us regular investors, the 11,000 that are affiliated to Linqto's platform. For those in the audience that may want to learn more or participate in this story, what would you recommend?
As long as I'm involved, I'll start posting some updates on my X. And it's just my name, Steven, Steven, last name Nerayoff on X. I posted something today just saying that I'm looking to help get involved. My objective is to get 11,000 people their shares, but it's not to villainize the company.
Yeah.
And figuring out how to make that happen, hopefully it'll be sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We're not here to villainize the company. We love Linqto. Linqto provided me a new way of providing generational wealth for my family and participating in the private capital markets that the average Joe has never been able to. So I'm optimistic still, Stephen. I really think that there's light at the end of the tunnel for us investors and for Linqto, the company, because at the end of the day, who would want to drive this company down to zero? Nobody works for free. It just doesn't make sense.
But look, the old management team, whether it's them or somebody else, there's a lot of customers that were at Linqto, right? Mm-hmm. There is a product market fit. Right, it's clearly a product market, and they clearly were doing it better than everybody else, right? Or as well, they're one of the leaders in the space. That kind of goodwill and that learning and whatever doesn't usually get thrown away. It gets repurposed by somebody.
Could I ask you a question about SPVs and the structuring? Is that anything you'd be willing to talk about?
In general, I can. I don't know the specifics here, and I've heard both ways, and I don't believe either one. I can read the documents myself and make a determination in terms of something. It strikes me as difficult to believe that something was wrong because they have had purchases and then they've had exits out of other investments. So it's run the entire life cycle. They're probably using the same template. It's not like they're making a new template for each investment. Maybe there's some minor changes, but that is what kind of gives me some confidence. And also, I've looked into, obviously, I said Dan's got an illustrious background, but I also looked into the management team. And I said, who am I dealing with on the other side? I didn't really find any skeletons in the closet, and they both seem to be fair.
Like you mentioned, Dan was a professor at Stanford, and his focus was governance. And here we are talking about the governance of Linqto and things of that nature.
Look, I don't want to speak for him, but if it was me and somebody built that kind of a reputation their whole life, it would seem really bizarre to me that they would go and do something illicit all of a sudden out of nowhere. You say, people don't become crooks at 60 or 70 years old. Yeah. So that's why I give them the benefit of the doubt. And let's figure it out. And hopefully there can be an amicable solution to this.
He even said up on stage that Linqto was his dream job when he was offered it. And for me, that resonated because that's why I was so passionate to hop over. We're talking about a wonderful opportunity, providing every means for an individual, middle America, to provide generational wealth for their families, themselves.
Look, there are other models, fractionalizing, but this was a model that worked. It was a new model. It wasn't using our new technology as much. It's not about the technology, but can they get the stock at a good price? Are they selling it to the small investors at a reasonable markup because they make some money there? And apparently it looks like they were very fair business people because people kept buying other stock from them. And because somebody's not accredited, this is like a really big misnomer. And I think that accredited, the whole thing should be more, if anything, you should give somebody a financial exam and like a driver's license and then let them be in it, right? The XRP community is a perfect example, right? I've met so many people in the XRP community that they're in blue-collar jobs, but their financial literacy is like off the charts. Me and them are talking about the next financial system for the next 100 years. They're super intelligent people, right? And the whole concept, that's one of the reasons I got into crypto, is because I wanted to give power back to the people, the average person. I wanted to democratize capital. I was glad that my ICO model took off. And I think this situation is causing a lot of angst out of a lot of people. And so there's enough of a force here that it's probably not something that firms like Sullivan Cromwell would be, I can imagine that they would be, as a firm, getting involved in.
Did you read the press release today on Morningstar or PR Newswire?
Yeah, they quoted me in there. Look, any time that I see it's the average investor or average people being taken advantage of, I'm willing to put myself online. I sold all my Ether and all my XRP when I came out publicly because I didn't want anybody to say that I had any
vested interest.
And in fact, at Ethereum, it's public that I did not accept any of my Ether. And I gave up almost 2 million Ether. And I don't regret that decision for a second, right? I wanted to do it. You don't do everything in life for money, right? The fact that the ICO went global, the utility token took off, and those two kind of protected crypto for a while. If you implemented the model that I put in, the SEC couldn't get to you. That going global and seeing crypto explode, and to your point, what was surprising, this is sold out. The people are interested here. It's not like other conferences I've gone to, tech conferences, where they're looking and see what's a new technology. No, everybody is so interested in the ecosystem. And when they go up to talk to somebody, I'm listening to some of the conversations, like they're getting into the tech. And this is like it's a fireman, right? But he understands the tech because there's a lot of YouTube channels on XRP, on the ledger, and on the technology. And so this is an unusual, I would say the most knowledgeable crypto event I've ever seen.
Yeah, in an unusual circumstance.
Unusual circumstance, but you know, this doesn't help the people that own the Ripple equity. But let's be thankful that at least the SEC thing is, regardless of every little bow and tie isn't done, for all purposes is pretty much done.
The sentiment from Dan was rather positive given the circumstance. Regardless if they didn't talk about the Linqto equity, their focus was indeed to make sure that the 11,000 investors are made whole. And he did mention that he envisions 6 to 9 months from now that we're going to be looking back, and this is going to be just we're going to look at, wow, that was a really weird time, but thankfully it's far behind us.
And I'm here to figure that out. And if all I figure out is information that people can rest easy, and let's say it's 6 months, but they can sleep at night and they know that there's a solution, and maybe there is already, right? Maybe he's not at liberty to speak about it. I heard John Deaton spoke before, and one of the reasons I was like immediately ready, because I heard John was involved, and I couldn't have more respect for somebody than John, and he helped me out a lot when I was coming out. And I'm going to just reiterate what I heard, and I saw it on a video. He said he doesn't give a damn, basically, about what they said and what they said.
He's got no loyalty to either party.
And neither do I. And John and I are pretty much, I don't want to say we're daredevils, but we're pretty fearless. And we want to just get to the truth.
Yeah.
We're going to look at the facts and see where the facts lead us. And if there's a culprit, then they'll be held accountable. But oftentimes, there is no culprit. Most of the time, I could be obviously slanted, given my background, I would say there's always a culprit. But most of the time, it's just incompetence that causes these problems. I'm not saying that's what's happening here, because it sounds like they had a good management team. But I feel good that John's here, and I'm going to come in from a different angle. I haven't spoken to him about this, but there's enough people between the community and, let's call us little sharpshooters, that are running to see what we can do. John and I wouldn't rest until the situation was resolved. I'm not going to want to speak for him, but obviously everybody saw what he did. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Linqto, when he got the 75,000 people, the initial big chunk of that came from Linqto investors in Ripple, like 10 or 11,000.
Absolutely. I came through the Ripple community and used my XRP to invest in Ripple Labs private equity. And so that is in itself also identified that there's a separation between the asset classes itself, or Ripple as a company and XRP as the digital asset. And so many individuals followed that same route. And from there on, it was just a springboard. Okay, we can get exposure into Uphold, the platform that didn't delist XRP, or you can invest in Kraken, another reputable exchange, or SpaceX. And so Linqto's platform truly gave us everyday individuals or investors the opportunity to not only invest into the private capital markets, but to diversify across companies and even sectors.
Yeah, look, hopefully I've done my share to democratize capital. I care about the average person having the same opportunities, because I don't believe like the average person is less intelligent. They chose to do something that maybe doesn't make as much money as this guy, but that doesn't mean that it has anything to do with their intelligence or their investment abilities, right? And I think this was a threat to the system. At least in the United States now, we have a new administration, and Trump has been amazing and opened things up. And in situations like this, gets public, John and I both, I can tell he cares about the little guy, right? I care about the little guy. I put my life on the line for that, and he put like a lot on the line for that. And
John came from poverty, and so he was a little guy. And similar with me and my family, we ate tuna, rice, and corn almost every single day, or oatmeal, because that's all my parents could afford.
Yeah, look, It's a mindset, right? It's a matter of whether or not you don't believe everybody's equal or you don't think, and unfortunately, a lot of people in society don't. I've spent my entire career working on things that would help the average person. And in this particular case, look, we're not going to rest until some resolution comes into play. And I think having that kind of community behind it is really important. Going back to my lawsuit, like Alan Dershowitz is a constitutional lawyer. He came on my team, and mainly because my fact pattern was so perfect. It was like a unicorn fact pattern that we could go, and there was these multiple agencies, and it's really hard to sue the government. But I actually thread the needle, and I have the evidence. I have the evidence that they actually fabricated the case on FBI emails, so it doesn't get any crazier than that. But what you're talking about, the average person, I'm a lawyer. What people don't know about this is that the DOJ came after me for 8 years before this, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. It was a sister case, and I won. So it's 2-0 to the DOJ. I don't want a third. That was the Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. I don't want anything to do with that. But the point is that I want my case to bring change.
Yeah.
And I won't go into the specifics. I did have an opportunity. I was lucky enough to actually speak to the president about it. And
You spoke to Donald Trump?
yeah, I did. And I'm not going to go into specifics. I'll just tell you that my opinion, let's put it that way, was that he understood. And whether or not you like him or you don't like him, he was in a situation that was, the system was used against him, right?
His family was debanked.
They were debanked, they were weaponized, and people were saying he's this. And I said, look at the totality of this, right? It's somebody who's running for president. It's unprecedented. You like him, don't like him, but next time around, and this is the key point, the next time around it's going to be your candidate. That's why Alan Dershowitz wrote a book. It's Trump, right? And he's a liberal, right? So he's not a Trump supporter, never voted for Trump. That goes back to my lawsuit, is that I'm an attorney. I had the wherewithal to fight it. I eventually actually fired almost all my attorneys except for one and did it myself. But the odds of me getting out of that, even being innocent, and plus I also had a video of what they said I did. I was on video. They didn't know I had the video, and they still weren't dropping the case. So what is the average person? There are possibilities of them overcoming it. It's like zero. Yeah. And so the problem is that the system, the rules are rigged. Very similar to what we're doing here in crypto. The financial markets, with the accredited investors, it's rigged. If you can't get into the last Uber or Airbnb or OpenAI today, you are not able to get into those rounds. Like, it's very hard for wealth to be distributed. And I've spent my career like doing that. And so I have some stuff that's coming out that I've been working on really tirelessly, and I hope that it's going to do a lot in that area.
Oh man, I'm excited to hear or see what you're about to unfold for the community, the world. Steven, for those in the audience that would like to follow you as a visionary in the space or engage in this story, how can they?
On my Instagram, X is Steven, S-T-E-V-N, and my last name, Nerayoff. YouTube, it's just, for some reason, it's Steve. Yeah. I know they look to be a little bit more cordial, but so it's Steve Nerayoff. So it's just at Steven Nerayoff, and you can get me on any of the platforms. But primarily, I'll be talking about this story on X.
Okay. I'll be sure to copy your links to your socials and to the website, free link to, and the recent press releases in the description and comments below. Steven, thank you for sharing your time with me. I appreciate you fighting for the little guy and all 11,000 investors within the Linqto community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thanks.